We did enter one concentration camp. It was near the end of the war, and you just can't describe what I saw.
When his Tank Battalion entered a Nazi concentration camp, Johnny Stevens was only 20 years old. He had grown up in Georgia in the 1930s.
Living in the South in those days, it was really an experience that you wouldn't want to go through it twice. You never had the opportunity to do things like the white people did. We lived in an all-black neighborhood. You had to eat in your own restaurant. And if you went to a restroom, one was marked colored, the other was marked white. It was deeply rooted, segregated Georgia. And that segregation lasted until I went away to war. And when I went in the Army, it was still a segregated Army.
Americans who knew all about Southern racism and lawlessness were little aware of the violently racist state being built in Germany by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Nazism exploited belief in racial purity and fear of racial degeneration, a fear that was widely held in German society. In Nazi racial theory, Germans were members of the so-called Aryan race, identifiable by pseudoscientific measurement. The Aryan race was threatened by pollution from lesser races, Jews, non-Germans, people of color. It is the Jews, Hitler declared, who bring Negroes into the Rhineland, with the clear aim of ruining the white race by the resulting bastardization. Like the Jews, people of color were considered intartata, degenerate. The Nazis promoted their supposed racial superiority wherever they could. German boxer Matt Schmeling was sent to America to take on the heavyweight champion Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber. Joe Louis knocked out Schmeling in the first round.
Joe Louis was like an idol to all American young men at the time. He made you feel important. He made you feel like you belonged.
But such victories changed nothing for black Americans. When war came, they were going to have to fight for the right to fight. The armed forces were rigidly segregated. There were no black Marines or airmen. There were no black sailors in combat units. They could serve only as mess attendants and cooks, orderlies and stevedores. There were virtually no black workers in war industries. But modern war was going to require total national mobilization. African Americans were going to demand to be a part of it. The black press was calling for an end to discrimination in war industries and segregation in the military. Military commanders, bureaucrats, and the president saw this as a big problem. The Negro problem. Meeting with black leaders, President Roosevelt suggested that putting Negro bands aboard battleships might be a good start. The meeting was not a success. Mary McLeod Bethune, a member of FDR's unofficial black cabinet, spoke to her friend Eleanor Roosevelt. Mrs. Roosevelt put pressure on her husband. Finally, the president lifted the long-standing quotas. From now on, blacks would be admitted to all branches of the military, and they would be eligible for officer training. William O. Hasty, a respected black educator and judge, was appointed to oversee Negro military affairs. But FDR absolutely refused to end segregation in the armed forces.
If you were a soldier, you were in uniform. If you went to town, you had to ride the back of the bus. If you wanted to eat, you had to eat in a black restaurant. If you wanted to use the facilities in a train station or a bus station, you had to go in the part that was marked colored and one was marked white. We wore the same uniform. We were there for the same reason, but we couldn't do the same things.
came, it seemed certain that things would change for black servicemen. Now they would have to be allowed to fight for their country. The attack gave America her first black combat hero, Dory Miller. A messman with no gunnery training, Miller had picked up a machine gun of a fallen gunner and brought down at least 2 Japanese planes. He won the Navy Cross. The Navy used Miller to recruit in the black community. His mother worked with leaders like Adam Clayton Powell to get African Americans behind the war effort. But Miller was still only a messman 2 years later when he was killed in action. A month after Pearl Harbor, Joe Louis was drafted. Newsreels followed the champ's progress in his all-black cavalry regiment. But despite the weapons training, the Army still had no plans to send black soldiers into combat.
All American News brings you our people's contribution to America and freedom. Richmond, Virginia is all out for the bond drive.
The All-American News was the only newsreel made especially for black audiences, seen in black communities across America. It proclaimed black support for America's war.
Making a lovely appearance indeed were the WWIIs in their smart uniforms, and of course the Boy Scouts, sturdy citizens of tomorrow. Many bond buyers make their purchases in theaters. Roosevelt Wharton, a chauffeur, and his wife Anna Wharton, a beautician, seen in a Washington, D.C. theater lobby. They have just bought a $1,000 bond, which is their 10th.
When Picatinny Arsenal at Dover, New Jersey needed more workers to make more ammunition for our fighting forces, the appeal was to Harlem.
African Americans adopted Winston Churchill's V for Victory sign, but theirs stood for victory in the struggle for rights and opportunities as well. 12 months after Pearl Harbor, 500,000 black men had been inducted into the armed services. They were going to be fighting on 2 fronts, abroad and at home. Abroad against enemies who were out to establish racial hierarchies worldwide. At home against the everyday racism of American life. 2 New York City buddies, Leonard Smitty Smith and E.G. McConnell, just reached the age of enlistment in 1942.
What made you go in the service?
Man, I just wanted to get in here. You know, just like you. You were gung-ho.
Yeah, but I had to go in the service because I was doing things wrong in school, so I had a choice. Either mess up or go into the service.
Well, what made you volunteer for the tanks?
Well, I tried to go into the Air Force, but you know, they wasn't taking blacks at that time.
Yeah,
So therefore, they told me the next best thing was to go into the Army, so I signed up for Army and volunteered, went to Army.
Well, I just felt it was a patriotic duty. That's why I wanted to go, and I wanted a piece of action.
Oh, well, I wanted to keep out of trouble, because if I didn't, I'd have been sitting up in jail somewhere, so that's why I signed up, because the policeman came to my house and told my mother, either he straightened up or go into the service. So my mother said, what do you want to do? I said, let me go into the service. She signed the papers, and I went in. Well, Mac, when you went down, and when you enlisted, would you go by yourself?
I tried to, but here comes Mom's. It was May 1942, you know, 5 months after war. And anyway, Mom's had packed my clothes. See, I didn't want to take none of them old Knickerbocker breeches. I only had one pair of long pants in my life up until that time, see. And Mom's packed all this mess and went on down there. And then the sergeant down there, she went on. I was talking to some of the guys, see. Had some of my sister's eyebrow pencil, put a little smudge over there to make myself look
older.
Yeah. And she went back talking to the sergeant, telling me, take care of my boy. Good God, was I embarrassed. I wanted to break ranks and leave. You know? We shipped out for Fort Knox, Kentucky. As the train was chugging through the hills in Kentucky, orders came down for us to pull the shades down in our cars. Now, there was some white troops in part of the train and black troops in the forward part right behind the engine. This is where colored usually rode during those days, and that's where we got all the smut and smoke and fumes. Well, my curiosity got the best of me. Why did we have to pull these shades down? Well, being young, wise guy, 16 years old, I knew all the tricks, and I was going to find out and tell the rest of my buddies. See, so I went and peered out between the two cars, and as I looked off to the side in the hills, I saw a bunch of these hillbillies, real old rednecks, and they were waving at this troop train. Some of them had shotguns as they were waving, and I said, wow, I couldn't believe it. See, so finally I found out the reason is that shots had been fired at the colored troop trains on several occasions in the past.
Most of the Army's basic training camps were in the South. Most of the white officers assigned to black units were Southern also. They were supposed to have more experience in handling Negroes.
They took me, along with 599 other young men, all African Americans, and they took us down to Georgia. Now, I look in this group and I see that most of you are around my age, so I'm pretty sure you must be aware what it was like to be in Georgia in 1943 and to be black. That was a painful experience for me. Well, we worked on the red clay of Georgia for 3 months trying to be good infantry soldiers, but when it was over, they said, look, we don't need you to be infantry soldiers. We want you to be combat engineers. And so the 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion was born.
Despite the promises made by the government and the Army, only a few model combat units were developed, largely for their public relations value. Among them was the 761st Tank Battalion, one of the 3 black armored battalions the Army formed. The Army could choose from among the very best to fill the few places in the 761st. Preston McNeil, Wilbur Denson, Walter Woodson, William McBurney. They and the other men of the 761st knew they were an elite unit. Their motto was, come out fighting. But the Army had little intention of using them in battle.
Well, we came into the Army in 1942. Then we were shipped down to Fort Knox, Kentucky. Then from Fort Knox, Kentucky, we went down into Louisiana. And we took a lot of training down there on maneuvers in Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, and that's where we ran into a lot of the fellas from the South that joined us, and we became very close as comrades and friends and whatnot, and that's where most of the Northerners learned about the segregation of the South.
My comrades did not understand segregation, so I explained to them about segregation, because I was raised under segregation. And they couldn't understand the signs as colored, white. I said, well, I'm used to this, and this is what y'all have to get used to as long as you're in the southern states. But it took time to get to them. I preached to them every night. They called me hardboiled Charlie and all kinds of names, but it didn't bother me. A lot of them refused to listen and went to town and got in a little trouble. Then they realized that they didn't mess with them Southerns in the South. We had our own barracks. We had our own movies. We had our own PX. We couldn't go into the main PX. And it was rough. Down south, when first time I went to town, they told us to go to town with a little Southern boy because I was 17 years old. I really didn't know what discrimination was about. But I said, no, I'm going to town by myself. And I went to town. When he got into town, I went through a field and got on the wrong side of town. When I got on the wrong side of town, I was in the store going to buy some things. This man was going to sell me, and 2 white MPs came in. They asked me what was I doing there and how did I get there, and I explained to them how I got there. And then that's when they told me, well, we're going to escort you back to your side of the town. I said, all right. I said, can I buy my things? He said, no, you can't buy anything here. So when we got back to my side of the town, there were some black MPs. And they said, well, what happened? He says, well, he just walked on the wrong side of the town, and we just brought him back over there. But these MPs, they whipped my butt and put me in jail. Because all they were told is that any time black do something wrong, whip him. And that's what happened.
Johnny Holmes was a corporal in Charlie Company.
I never ever remembered speaking to a white soldier. The only whites that I spoke to was my commanding officer, my company commander, only if I was asked a question and only if I was told to do something. That was the only time I've ever spoken to a white soldier during that period.
We went into this, we went to the little town. We were told by our officers to go in and pick up some supplies. So we went into the little town. I got out of the truck. We were in a 6x6. I got out of the truck, went into the little store, and was ordering. And I started back out, and the storekeeper said, "Don't go back out there." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Just come with us." And he put me underneath the porch. And I saw this comrade of mine, my friend, being dragged up and down the street behind a car. They had tied a rope to the car and to him and was dragging him up and down the street until he died. And at that point, they told me just stay on the porch. So I stayed. It was about 4 o'clock in the evening. So I stayed on the porch till after dark. And then they took me out and took me back to my camp.
There were frequent incidents of black soldiers fighting back against racism, but the Army remained certain that integration would destroy discipline and morale. They had no intention of changing their policy. In April, Judge William Hastie, the War Department's new civilian aide for Negro affairs, resigned in disgust. Racial violence erupted in the overcrowded black communities across America. It started in Detroit, when whites tried to keep black families out of public housing built for them. 25 black people and 9 whites were killed. In Harlem, resentment over price gouging and segregation in the military boiled over when a black soldier was shot by a white policeman. African Americans were not winning the war on the home front. Meanwhile, in September of that year, the 761st moved down to Texas. There was a contingent of German prisoners of war at Camp Hood, some of high rank.
We were on maneuvers down there, and we saw that the Germans was being treated much better than we were. The German prisoners that they had brought over, they could go into the Army PXs where the black troops could not.
Black soldiers were ordered to wait on German prisoners. And they watched in disgust as one German officer who died in the camp was given a funeral with full military honors by the Americans.
Now this is where we really took our hardcore combat training. And this is where Patton picked up on us, on maneuvers. He was inspecting troops that was on maneuvers in Louisiana, Texas, and stuff like that. And he had got a report that there was a black tank outfit that looked pretty good. And when he saw us, he said that he thought that we was the finest tankers he'd ever seen.
The black tanker's awe and affection for George S. Patton persists to this day. In reality, as he later wrote in his autobiography, Patton believed that black soldiers lacked the reflexes for armored combat.
You must remember that during World War II, we had 2 armies, one white army and one black army. And there was no integration of the races. As a result of that, the USO also had separate production companies or groups. And I was in charge of all of the USO productions having to do with black entertainers. Now, in case you don't know what USO Camp Shows was, USO Camp Shows was the organization that was set up to furnish entertainment to American troops all over the world during World War II.
Someday he'll come along, the man I love, and he'll be big and strong, the man I love. And when he comes my way, I'll do my best to make him stay. He'll look at me and smile too, from which I'll never roam. Who would you? And all else above, I'm waiting for the man I love.
On June 6, 1944, the Allies staged the largest invasion in the history of war. 200,000 troops, supported by thousands of planes and ships, tanks and vehicles, landed on Omaha Beach. But one of the best trained armored units in the Army wasn't there. The 761st had been left at home. Casualties were high as they tried to break out at the beachhead they had won. Tank losses were high also. The Sherman tanks had gas engines and often exploded in flames when hit. Tankers called them Ronsons. Life expectancy was short inside of them. Desperate for trained tankers, the Army at last sent for the 761st. Young men who had never left their country before, looking forward with eagerness and some fear to doing at last what they had been trained to do. The 761st was about to go to war. In August 1944, PFC E.G. McConnell and his buddies left New York Harbor in a convoy bound for Britain.
Our quarters were rough. We were down in the hold of this ship, and we slept in hammocks, and the hammocks were attached to these poles. They were 5 high, not double-decker, but 5 high. You had to climb a pole like a monkey and try to get in your hammock without falling. A lot of guys fell down, but usually when they fell, their fall would be broken by falling on top of someone, you know. The going was rough, and guys got seasick, and the food on there was nothing. The bread was raw in the middle of it. It seems as though they took the good American rations and stored it to take home to their families, and they fed us all sorts of garbage, porridge, and beans, and seaweed, or whatever.
In England, there was no history of racial segregation. Britons were mostly ready to accept black troops, but the Army spread rumors about black men and white women, about rape, VD, and violence.
Things never got better because when we landed in England, they told the English people or whatever European people they came in contact with that we were monkeys and that we had tails and that we couldn't fight and we were just bringing the tanks up for the white boys to fight with. This is the message that they spread throughout Europe. And you wouldn't think that your own countrymen would do this to you, but they did it to us.
African-American Army nurses stationed in England weren't allowed to treat white Americans. Since there weren't enough black casualties, the nurses were assigned to treat German prisoners of war. Only when the nurses rebelled against this duty were they allowed to treat American soldiers of all races. Everyone is treated the same when it comes to dying, said the American General J.C. Lee. In October, the 761st crossed the English Channel. It was a day none of those who survived would ever forget. In 1982, 16 of the veterans were reunited in France. They returned to be honored for their part in the liberation of Europe from the Nazi armies. They laid a wreath on the tomb of the unknown soldier. All the veterans who attended had their memories. Memories of the last time they came to this country. rolling out in their brand new Sherman tanks in October 1944 onto the sands of Omaha Beach.
Now, for the first time, I saw what war was like when I saw the abandoned barges and ships that had sunk. And I couldn't imagine how the Allies could have such a landing and still continue to make advancements and crush his enemy. And we were told that we'd have to convoy across France to up where the Third Army front was, which was up around Metz. This is around where General Patton, his drive came to a halt because he ran away from the supply line.
The veterans set out to retrace their journey through France and the Low Countries, along the roads they had once traveled in tanks.
Some of the real heroes of the outfit.
Horace Jones, a second lieutenant in 1944, was among them.
Much had been taken when we got there, but on the outlying places there were a few pockets. We spearheaded a lot of places. We were door openers. We'd go in and kick the door open. And then the rest of these divisions, they would take over.
Late October 1944, we were called to ranks. We lined up in a field in St. Nicholas, France, because we heard that General Patton was coming down to greet us into his army. As we were called to attention, eyes straight forward, I stretched my vision as far to the left as I could as I heard the approaching Jeep. General George S. Patton was a 3-star general at the time. Boy, what pride, huh? The feeling that I had. Here's one of the greatest warriors of World War II, and we were gonna fight under his command. Out stepped Patton, sparkling, dapper, walked very briskly, stepped up on a half-track, looked at us, gazed at us from left to right, and said, "I sent for this unit because I heard you were good, and I have nothing but the best in my outfit. I want you to go up there and kill them goddamn Krauts. I want you to give them a licking. I don't care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut son of a bitches." As he completed his speech, he looked me straight in the eye with gray eyes. And he said, "Listen, boy, I want you to go up there and shoot up every goddamn thing you see. I want you to shoot haystacks, church steeples, graveyards, old ladies, children, any damn thing that you see. This is war."
Staff Sergeant Johnny Stevens of Company A kept a diary of those days in Europe.
November 5th, 1944. Well, here we are, somewhere in France, and we're supposed to go on our first mission today. Only a couple of more hours. I have smoked 2 packs of cigarettes.
On its first day in action, the battalion took its first casualties. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, was seriously wounded. And the entire crew of Harvey Woodard's M4 were killed. These pictures had been taken just the day before the battle. The tank hadn't been hit. The men seemed to be unharmed. They must have been killed by the concussion of a shell burst directly overhead.
Now, the first outfit that we fought with was the New England Division, the Yankee Division, the White D, 26th Division. And first time that I got wounded was at Hill 309. That was in France. And it was an early morning attack. And my tank, being a platoon sergeant, my tank, I was in the lead tank. And we had been told by the recon boys there was nothing out there except heavy machine gun fire. But when we got in the middle of the field, we found out that they had anti-tank guns. They also had bazookas. And they started knocking out my tanks, one behind the other. And then my tank got hit. And I ejected myself out of the tank. I hit the ditch. Then they started raking the field with machine gun fire. And then some sergeant from the 26th Division, he yelled over me and he says, "Sergeant, you hit?" I said, "Yeah, man." He says, "It's bad?" I said, "I'm hit hard as hell." just like that. So he rolled over to where I was, and I had blood running down my combat jacket. And he took me and pushed me over the bench, over the embankment, and threw me on the other side, out of the line of fire. Then he raised up to come over the bank with me. And as he raised up, German about maybe 10 yards away in the bushes, took a brick gun and cut him half in two. He killed him. See, I never knew who that sergeant was. All I know, he was from the 26th Yankee Division, who we were supporting at the time. And that's the only thing I knew.
E.G. McConnell, retired now, recreates those days on the Western Front. He has good reason to remember.
We were advancing on this town. All hell broke loose. They fired HE shelled or hit. That's all I remember till sometime after dark, when I came to, out in a ditch next to my tank, burning like hell.
And all of a sudden we heard over the radio where the Germans hit the first tank, the last tank, and it would say Germans all over the place. So we backed up, ran around to the back of the town, and we laid nothing but fire on them, 50 caliber, 30 caliber, and 76 millimeter, all in the HE. No armor piercing HE until we ran out of ammunition. And on the radio I could hear them saying, watch out for this, watch out that. Then I heard them say, EG say, I've been hit. I said, oh my God, then I hit my man.
When I went to pull my helmet off of my head, I felt a sharp pain, and I think I passed out again because the shrapnel had lodged in my head, halfway in the helmet and through into my skull. Well, anyway, this young white fellow who was in the infantry, he grabbed a hold of my helmet for me, and he held on to it, even though he was much, much more seriously injured than I. See, I was coming and going. I wasn't conscious all the time. And he saw that we were evacuated together. And this is sort of odd, you know. Here's a white soldier looking out for his black combat companion. And anyway, we were evacuated. We went back to 100th General Hospital in Bar-le-Duc, France. I went through surgery and all like that and wound up on a ward. I was the only black on the ward. This two-star general came down to visit this hospital, and the ward must have been about 100 feet long or so. And he walked all the way down on the side. Good morning, Corporal. How are you? How do you feel today? Hello, Private. What unit? He went, When he got to me, he hesitated for a moment, looked over at me, and here I had my head wrapped from a head injury. And this man looked at me and says, what's wrong with you, boy? Got the claps? Man, I was devastated. My buddy next to me, young white guy, he looked up. He was in a cast from his neck all the way down, both feet, bar cross in front of both feet and all like that. He said, hey, General, if he got it from your mother. Now send me back up to the front, you son of a bitch. He was out of war altogether. He was so broken up. That's why he could say it. Well, this hurt this guy, but it didn't hurt him nothing like the hurt that I got that day. Later on that day, here comes this same bum walking through the ward. And I saw him coming. He's giving out the Purple Hearts. I had a comic book. I didn't even read the damn things, but I just put the comic book up my face like I was reading the thing. And he went through his ceremony and then handed it to me. I didn't even reach for it. Just let him put it down on the bed. Boy, I'm telling you, my country, 'tis of the sweet land of bigotry.
The German commanders had assembled 28 divisions, supported by hundreds of tanks, along a weak spot in the Allied offensive. On December 6th, they attacked, stretching and nearly cutting the Allied line. The Battle of the Bulge had begun.
Well, to me, I'd say the German soldier was the best piece of fighting machinery that the world has ever seen. They were dedicated the same as we were. They believed in what they were fighting for. And when a man is fighting for a belief, it's difficult to change his mind. They've been hit. The Russians, the Americans, the British, the French, everybody was hitting them, and they kept fighting. See, the German soldier was like a robot. See, that's what made him good. The American soldier was just opposite. They had cooks, bakers, newspapermen, street sweepers, they just put us all together, and they made an army overnight almost.
Patton's Third Army, accompanied by the black armored units, raced northward to Bastogne, where the German advance had surrounded an American airborne division.
December 16th. Well, it's here. The great German counterattack. Pulling out and going north to Belgium tonight. It will take 2 days. It's so cold and the snow and ice is making it tough on tankers.
You know, this has been a memory that has lingered in my head for over 40 years. It's a scene somewhere up in Belgium around the time of Bulge. And man, it was one cold blast up there. Beautiful country, but really couldn't appreciate the beauty because behind every tree, a snowbank, we knew it could be very, very deadly. I'll never forget the drone of the tank engines. And the tracks were sort of quiet because it was on the snow. Just advancing the infantry alongside our tanks as we rounded this hilly country and went about our business. These are parts that really omitted from that movie Patton. We were so very, very much involved in the Battle of Bulge. Yet no mention has ever been made of it, about the Black Tankers, the Black Panther Battalion. The true Black Panthers.
The day after Christmas, General Eisenhower called for volunteers from black units. Men trained for combat, but who were assigned to labor and support battalions. Thousands came forward. The only African-American general in the U.S. military, Benjamin O. Davis Sr., had been brought out of retirement to figurehead the black contingents.
Brigadier General Benjamin O. Davis arrived. He made a complete inspection tour despite the weather. These scenes are in Belgium. He looked over everything that had to do with Negro troops.
As the Battle of the Bulge wore on, the fighting and the dying were becoming integrated. Everything else remained separate.
I understand that now we are just about to approach the village of Tilley, where I feel that I was informed through your history that this was the first tank-to-tank battle that took place in the small village just outside Bastogne.
In Tilley, on the 5th of January, units of the 761st, hurrying to the relief of Bastogne, ran into a superior force of German tanks. Casualties were heavy.
We started in this large clearing, and we were going through this clearing, and the snow was about 3 to 4 feet deep. It was heavy, and we were getting fire from all over, and as my tank was going forward, we got hit. Smitty was in there. We had a fella in there, was our driver, Lil Willie DeVore. He got killed in the tank. And if I'm not mistaken, I remember correctly, his head got almost taken off when the shell hit the tank. Smitty and I got out the tank and another fella, and we started trying to do the best we could to get to the woods. And this clown Smitty, he was hollering, I was ready to stop. I was exhausted, shooting at anything I could see or move or whatever. And this clown Smitty was hollering, remember the Savoy. You know how we was doing up in Savoy and clowning and whatnot, and we were crawling on our butts and hands and fingers trying to get to the woods to try to get out of the enemy fire while they were shooting at us.
Outside town, the veterans found a farmer who remembered the battle.
But after a few days came the tanks across the wood, in the wood, across directing in the wood, trees, everything. Yeah. And then American forces with cannon, big artillery on the village. Holiday, the 6th of January.
Artillery.
Artillery.
Right.
A barrage.
Right.
Artillery, yes. And after that, American forces came into the village, but there were a big struggle.
Well, these tanks come across there, this is our tanks, boom, our tanks.
They were our tanks. There were 18 American tanks destroyed and several German. A great battle of tanks there.
After 5 days of bitter fighting, the 761st captured the town and closed the Brussels-Bastogne highway. One of the tanks still stands in Bastogne, a memorial to the Liberators.
And the reason why delay was important was because it was a way to cut the advance of the Germans in their particular move to confiscate all of the equipment that was on the east coast of France.
We broke the link of the Germans going to the coast, and then we also broke their link. We isolated a lot of their troops within certain areas to where they couldn't join back up to make a major force.
The little town Hermie, about 10 kilometers outside of Liège. And we were billeted in these people's homes. And we stayed with a family, Rodelay. And they were just loving type of people. So then when we get in Liège, I looked up the family in the telephone book. The next day, when the bus pulled up, they were naming people. There's Rags, and there's Jack Gilbert, there's Horace, you know. It was something that stirred the soul.
On the day of liberation in 1945, the Radelays buried a bottle of apple brandy on their farm. Today, they dug it up and opened it to toast their old friends.
Silence, please. I'd like to tell the reason why we're in this town tonight. Back in '44, they were dropping buzz bombs on this place. So they sent the 761st Tank Battalion in here to secure the town. And this particular house we're in, Horace Jones, he stayed in this house. And so they remembered him, so that's the reason why we are here today. Now, maybe Horace wanted to say something or not, I don't know.
It was a pleasure to be with the Rodelay family. They treated us very nice. They invited me and all of the friends to come out to their beautiful home, and they are showing us a lovely, lovely time. And I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart.
I'll say a toast. May God continue to bless this home, and may the fellowship which we have established never end.
Amen.
Amen.
Long ago, young African-American soldiers who had known only American society in a segregated army were received here gratefully, accepted as people, and welcomed as heroes. A lot of things had changed back home since then, but the memory of that long ago winter was still fresh.
Je vais regarder, hein.
Ah oui.
In March 1945, the 761st Tank Battalion was attached to the 7th Army, spearheading the American drive to the Rhine. They were among the first American battalions to break through the Siegfried Line into Germany. Resistance was fierce.
We came into this town, and we stopped the tanks, and everybody had piled out of the tanks. You know, we were searching the houses and whatnot. And I hit this house, and we went into the door, and there was some German people in there, and they said, Kamerad, you know, they were friendly. And I happened to glance at this, I saw something behind the door. So I slammed the door closed real fast, and this big German officer was standing up behind the door, and I stuck my pistol up in his face. And I said, surrender, you know, hollering surrender and whatnot. He said, spoke very good English. I don't have to surrender to you damn niggers. And when he said that, I slapped him right across the mouth, and teeth jumped all over the place. And I took his German Luger away from him and throwed him outside. And that was the issue. That was the whole issue of that thing.
Well, we crossed the German border yesterday and are holding the high ground. And whoever said the colored soldiers can't fight is a damn liar. Because the guys in the infantry told us they would rather have us with them than the white soldiers.
Black soldiers shared the fates of their white fellows. For their own propaganda purposes, the Germans filmed black soldiers taken prisoner in the battle for Europe. The German armies were on the defensive, but not yet beaten. And in Germany, American GIs who had experienced segregation and hatred at home were to be brought face to face with racism on a scale they could not have imagined. By late April, the tanks of the 761st had crossed into Austria, finally meeting the advancing Russians at the river ends. The German army was beaten. On May 8, 1945, the fighting ended in Europe. The war was soon over, but not the fight. Home was the same, but men who had seen war in the face of death were changed for good.
When the war was over and we got back here, it made an impression on me, because to say that we done all this here, and in plain English, we still got kicked in the ass when we got back here. Well, whatever, I done said it now. You know what I'm trying to say? You come back here, and you still, I had people in the South, relatives, and I had to visit them. And to go down there, and I couldn't even go in a store. I had to wait my turn to go in a grocery store to buy something. That was in Titusville, Florida. And that was in 1946. I'll never forget it. I had to wait my turn to go in the store to buy a package, a loaf of bread for my aunt. And I had been through all this crap overseas, so-called fighting for our country, and we get kicked in the butt again when we come back. I mean, it makes you feel bad, but like I've said before to the kids at the school, this is the only country I know, and it's a good country. Right or wrong, we're still a good country, but it's, well, whatever, okay?
America largely ignored the contributions of her black soldiers. It took 33 years for the 761st to be given the Presidential Unit Citation for their extraordinary heroism, the highest award any unit can win.
Nights are long since you went away. I think about you all through the day, my buddy, my buddy. Ain't nobody quite so true. I miss your voice, the touch of your hand, I just long to know that you understand, my buddy. Oh, you're a pal. Yes, your buddy. Mrs.